Greetings, friends. Welcome. We're in a sequel series now to Good Questions, No Easy Answers. It's called Oh, the Places, like Oh, the Places You'll Go. I want to think about a couple things with you today. I want to think about birth and baptism. Those things happen to you. They happen somewhere. They happen in the Bible. And it's kind of sneaky, isn't it, right? Say, where does your baptism happen? Well, maybe you were baptized somewhere, but then does it happen today in your life? Interesting question. Jesus' birth happened in Bethlehem. One of the questions we get is like, why Bethlehem of all places? Today, Bethlehem is a crowded city. Goodness, brutal traffic. You can't park your car. A lot of people live there, but not that long ago, it was just a little sleepy village a little bit out in the country from the city of Jerusalem. David Roberts went there in the 1800s and did this drawing of it. It's really interesting. Probably not that different from what it looked like in Bible times. Unspoiled, undeveloped, uncrowded. It's a dense population now. There's a basilica. They built a church over the place where traditionally Jesus was born. I take groups there. We go down in the crypt, and there's a little altar there, and you can kneel down. You can actually put your hand to this hole. Like that's where Jesus popped out into the world, where he was born, right? That's a super interesting place to go. Why Bethlehem? And we don't know. The Bible doesn't say why Bethlehem. It was the hometown of David, Jesus' ancestor. Oh, that's interesting. I like this. It was outside Jerusalem. Like that was supposed to be like the main place. It was kind of a joke on insiders who think, we're the cool insiders. And, it happened out there. That's the thing. It happened at the crossroads of the continents, right? Not in Africa or Asia or Europe, but right there at the crossroads, as if God right off had an intention to spread out and go in all directions. When you go to Bethlehem today, it's a little bit harrowing because you may have heard they put up a wall years ago to keep Palestinians and Israelis segregated from one another, hopefully safer. Arguable if that's correct. The wall is at its most pronounced and dominating in Bethlehem. You go through and it's like, oh, good grief. And what's interesting about the wall is there is graffiti all over the wall. And some of the world's great graffiti artists, Banksy and others, have come there and done graffiti. And you would think, since it's a place of tension, that a lot of the graffiti would be about tension, like we're right and those guys are wrong. It might be what we would do in America. Instead, all the graffiti on that wall is oriented toward peace and toward understanding and looking forward to the day that there's not a wall and we can reach across and we can hold hands and we can love each other. Jesus came into a place that to this day, it's not a sweet, sugary place. It's a place of tension. It's a place where we need peace. Goodness gracious, peace is needed there. Kind of a revolutionary thing, Jesus coming into such a world. And a question that you might ask is not just where was Jesus born, where were you born? And when were you born? Those things really matter. I was born in the deep South, Savannah, Georgia. That changes who you are. I was born in the 50s. I was born in the same year that Emmett Till was lynched and that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus. It's kind of shaped part of who I am. I was born in America during the Cold War, tension with the Soviet Union. I was born to Cecil and Elizabeth Howell. Did not choose my parents. Who they were impacts me to this day. Their genetic makeup. There's all this stuff that's unchosen. I don't choose to be a white person. I don't choose to be a guy. All those unchosen. It's really interesting to ponder your own birth, connecting it to Jesus. Well, where were you born? I'm sending out emails twice a week in this series, and in there I mentioned a place in Italy. It's cool if you ever get to go there, called Greccio. It's south of Assisi, north of Rome. It sits perched up on a beautiful mountain. And it's the place where St. Francis went and created history's first manger scene. This is in the 13th century. We assumed there were always manger scenes. Nobody had ever done it until Francis came along. He was so devoted to the humanity of Jesus. Most Christians back then, they'd made Jesus into this powerful deity, remote, scary even. But Francis understood that Jesus was human. He especially liked to think about the fact that God was born in Jesus, became a vulnerable infant, just like the rest of us. Now, doing that in Assisi, you see, this was during the Crusades. People were at that very time fighting with the Muslims over sacred places like Bethlehem. We got to own the place. So what Francis does there is he creates Bethlehem in Italy. It's like you don't have to go have a war to conquer that Bethlehem. Bethlehem can be wherever you are. Meister Eckhart, a theologian about 100 years after that, said, we're all meant to be mothers of God. We're all meant to give birth to God, for God to take on reality in our lives wherever we are. Where is Bethlehem? It's in the Middle East. Francis said it's also in Greccio. It's also in our church. It's in our homes. Where is it? Has God been born in you? Now, thinking also about baptism, you have the stories about Jesus and John the Baptist. Nobody called him John the Baptist right off. He was just John. He and Jesus are cousins. Did they know each other growing up? We don't know much about that, but maybe they did. Did they lose track of each other and then catch up with each other once they were grown up? Jesus goes down to the Jordan River, and it's, I don't know how to put it, was Jesus dunked in the Jordan River? When I take people to the Jordan River, they're always shocked by how narrow it is and how shallow it is. The place where Jesus most likely was baptized, you can wade across, and it doesn't come up to your waist, right? It's just kind of knee deep. Was Jesus dunked in that water? Did John more likely scoop up some water and pour it over his head? That's what we probably think. It's the question of when were you baptized? Where were you baptized? I was baptized in Dover, Delaware. My dad was in the Air Force up there. I was baptized. Really interesting. We're blessed to see so many baptisms at our church, and we need to be careful not to make it, oh, it's so cute, it's so sweet, oh, it's kind of cute and sweet. But what we're saying is that this child is part of the family of God. This child is sealed with God's Holy Spirit. It's pretty powerful stuff. This child's destiny is to be part of the people of God forever. I'll talk a lot in this series about St. Francis and what happened in Assisi. St. Francis, he was just Francis. He actually wasn't Francis yet. He was born. When he was born, his parents named him Giovanni. It's like John. He became Francesco later because his father dealt in French fabric. Francis affected a French accent. He learned French songs. He wore French clothing, so they called him Francesco, which just means Frenchy. When he was born, he was just Giovanni, and his parents took him for baptism at a church in Assisi that not many people go to called San Rufino. We can see the baptismal font in that church. That's my former colleague, Reverend Erin Bell, took a group there. She was there. And this may be the world's greatest baptismal font. St. Francis was baptized there. St. Clare was baptized there. Another saint later, a guy named Gabriel, was baptized there. The Emperor Frederick was baptized there. I mean, that's an amazing baptismal font, right, for all that to go on. Baptism, what is baptism? Catholics have a cool thing, when they enter their sanctuary, there's always water at the entrance. If you know Catholics, they touch their finger in the water and they put it to their forehead. And they try to remember their baptism. Martin Luther said there's no greater comfort in life than to be able to say, I am baptized. And you can do this at home. You have water, just touch it to your head. I am baptized. I'm sealed with God's Holy Spirit. I'm washed clean by the grace of God. It's absolutely a beautiful thing. Speaking of great baptismal fonts, I'd put up the one that's over at Belmont Abbey. I don't know if you've been to Belmont Abbey. It's just on the way to Gastonia from Charlotte. You turn off there. It's a Catholic school there. And at the Basilica, they have a baptismal font that is just stunning. It's this piece of huge rock, and it's hewn out so it can hold water. Turns out that rock used to be the slave trading block. Slave traders would take that stone and they would put God's good, beautiful human beings who were being treated like chattel, like property up there, and they would be examined and poked and prodded and then sold into slavery. They took that same stone and morphed it into the baptismal font. And here's what there's a plaque on it that says the following: upon this rock, men once were sold into slavery. Now, upon this same rock, through the waters of baptism, men become the free. You hear that? The free children of God. There's something freeing about being baptized. I invited, if you don't have any more time to listen, that's fine. I'm going to show you now a conversation that I had with one of our favorite theologians, guests during the pandemic, who's been with us quite a number of times, my friend Jason Biasy. Jason went to Davidson and then Duke Divinity School and got a PhD there like I did, and we've stayed close friends over the years. He was preaching in Vancouver. Now he's a pastor in Toronto, and he and I recently had a conversation about birth and baptism, and you'll really enjoy this. It's about 9 or 10 minutes, so stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Jason Biasy, welcome back to our online studies. You're one of our people's favorite guests. They always want you back, and here you are. Thanks for joining us.
I'm a friend of the program.
Man, when you last, you're like, the ninth associate pastor kind of here. When you last were with us, you were preaching in Vancouver, but now you're a pastor in Toronto.
It's a true story.
Preaching every week, doing real work.
Toronto has a kind of gravitational pull in Canada. Even everyone in Canada, even people in Toronto, like to complain about Toronto, but here we are.
We are. All right. So we just got through Christmas, and that was always great fun. And one of my goals is always to help people think about it theologically. So years ago, you were editing a book series, and you asked me to write a volume in it on birth. So my favorite parts of that, we're thinking about the birth of Jesus and why that matters. We've made it really cute, but why does just the birth of Jesus? Why is that? We tend to think, the cross and resurrection. Why does the birth matter so much?
Yeah, that's great. I love that book that you wrote in that series. So we believe a kind of astonishing thing about God, that God is not removed from materiality, stuff, our humanness, our very guts. So ancient Christians' opponents and critics thought it scandalous that we thought God got born, that God came through a human birth canal, that God has a Jewish mom. And we Christians said, wow, you're right. That is really odd. That's what we believe. In fact, God not only creates humanity, loves humanity. What that means is you love birth, you love people, you love more of them. God joins with humanity, becomes everything we are to make us everything God is. It's a pretty scandalous notion of God if you've paid any attention to how we human beings reproduce, right?
It's the only real thing that makes Christianity unique. We don't have better ideas about marriage or anything else. But it's that incarnation thing. I mean, our friend Sam Wells, who was at Duke Chapel for a long time, now is at St. Martin's. In the field, it ain't in any fields. It's right in the middle of Trafalgar Square.
A long time ago.
A long time ago. He says the most important theological word in the Bible is with. That God is with us.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that little preposition. It does so much work. I mean, you got to be careful with it, right? Because every people has claimed sort of divine sanction on even ghastly activities, and so have we Christians, right? But the particular form of God being with is getting born from an unmarried Jewish teenager from the sticks with an unlikely story about an unsought pregnancy. I mean, it's a pretty scandalous story when you press down on it. And you're right, our Jewish and our Muslim neighbors, cousins, when it gets right down to it, they'll kind of get off the train at this point. But I do think it's significant. There's a Jewish thinker named Michael Wishegrod who, poking around at the Christian doctrine of the incarnation, says, this is a Jewish idea. We Jews left it behind because you Christians ran with it and did something weird with it. But he says the incarnation of God is the Jewish people, all the children of Abraham and Sarah. So I do think it's a Jewish idea. It's just Judaism and Christianity developed like that. What one of us thought, the other said, nah, that can't be right. So that with doesn't start in Bethlehem, right?
So how does that birth of Jesus relate to my other topic for the study, which is baptism? Jesus is born, your children were born, you had them baptized. What's the relationship between those two things?
Yeah, lots of early Christian baptismal fonts are shaped like a womb, like a really pregnant woman. There's obviously imagery of water. In the Bible, we talk about getting born all over again, just like you're born from water a first time, you're born from water a second time. I think what we're trying to say is that following God and Jesus Christ requires a whole new kind of person.
Hmm.
Baptism, we believe, makes a whole new kind of person. That's why ways of baptizing that look like they could result in death by drowning are somewhat preferred to your and my Methodist skimpiness with the water, right? I try and get people as wet as possible. I know you do the same. Um, I saw this weird movie recently where someone had committed a horrible crime by accident. And it's a sci-fi movie. And in this sci-fi movie, they realize there's another Earth where everything on this Earth is replicated. And it becomes her great hope. Wait, maybe in this other Earth, I didn't do this thing.
Hmm.
In other words, it takes a whole new world to erase this level of harm. We kind
Hmm.
of believe baptism is a whole new world, birthed right in the middle of this old one, all made possible because God gets born and gets baptized.
You and I are both fond, isn't even the right word. The theologian Karl Barth.
Yeah.
Um, Goodness gracious. Remember, I started reading Barth and I couldn't stop. It was like a treadmill. I couldn't get off the thing and I loved it. And anyway, so I adore him. But
Yeah.
late in his life, he published this little skinny volume at the end of his church dogmatics where he baptized his children as infants. Then he stopped doing it, and he thought you should really only have baptism as an adult. I baptized my children when they were little. You did. I was not baptized as an infant, and I wish I had been. But
Yeah. Yeah.
what
Yeah.
do you do? What do you do with that? Infants, grown-ups?
Yeah. You and I both have to stop and think, okay, let's have a non-Bardian thought. Like it's hard to do.
Hard.
Um, so there's virtue in both kinds of baptisms. And I like to think the church needs to see both kinds, right?
Hmm.
So to
Hmm.
baptize infants, we're like Israel circumcising sons on the 8th day of their life. They don't get a choice. We don't ask them first. We're just doing this thing. I mean, I made sure my kids were Duke basketball fans before they had any say in the matter. Now, later, they picked it up for themselves, but by then, I had stacked the deck. They weren't going to just choose Carolina, right? Presumably, Christianity is more important than that. The church also needs to see adult baptisms because otherwise, it does look like a kind of baby ritual. So, adult baptisms do show that God is still in the conversion business. So, part of the difference is a question of volition. Does someone get to choose? And on that question, a Bardian response, really just a Christian response, is well, God chooses first. Our choice is only enabled by God's choice. We choose second, not first. So, some ways I put this is that in infant baptism, God says, you, I want you, I choose you, you're part of me forever. And then in our either confirmation or our conversion or in some kind of return to faith, we say, yes, I love you too. I choose you back. I'll come
Hmm.
along with you. But we all think, whatever flavor of Christian, that choice by us is preceded by God's choice coming first. That then only that enables our positive response.
I love that. We need to see both of those in the life of the church. Yeah. So, last question. You went to Israel with me. I think it was 26 years ago, maybe 27.
It was in '96. Yeah. So what
Man,
would that be? Your math is better than mine.
yeah,
26.
26 years
Yeah.
ago. My daughter Sarah, who's a pastor now, was 8 at the time. And so part of what I'm thinking about in this series is why location matters.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you got on a plane and you went with me to Israel. You read all this stuff in your Bible. I think about my grandparents. They were such profound Bible people. They never
Yeah.
dreamed of going there. So how does going there specifically, the Jordan River,
Yeah.
Bethlehem, where Jesus is born, how does going to such a place matter?
Yeah. I mean, we believe in a God who has an address, right? So in Israel's imagination, God lives at one temple way in Jerusalem. You can go there. Prayer is different there. We believe in Jesus of Nazareth, born in Bethlehem. Those are places with postal codes. There are people who've lived there since the time of Jesus, long before. So there's a strange way in which Christian faith, like Judaism, is placed. And there are lots of pressures to float free of place, to try and be universal, to try and appeal to all people, blah, blah, blah. But we still have this sort of geographic pull to specific patches of earth. Now, again, as with everything, you got to be careful with this. There's been a lot of blood spilt over claims like that.
Yeah.
We think those are places of peace, despite the ways we've treated them. I think the way it's supposed to work is going to a Bethlehem or a Nazareth, you're supposed to come back and love your own patch of earth with a similar fierceness, because God meets us in every possible place. But somehow loving our specific place is mediated through loving the place where God got born, walked around, healed, baptized, was executed, and rose from the dead. I'm thinking about another place you and I have been. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, just thinking about Assisi, right? So St. Francis, at a time when Europeans were killing people to get those holy places back, came up with a creche scene, which looks like just a sort of sweet little Christmas thing. It was actually radical, because he said, no, you can celebrate Christmas right here in Italy. You don't have to go kill somebody in some other place to do it. Your own fireside is also a holy place where God gets born. So we don't float free from place, but we also think God isn't bound by it. We are, though.
And even for people like my grandparents, they were never able to go to Assisi or Bethlehem or anywhere like that. Yeah. But they did have a keen understanding of God at their address on that patch of earth where they found themselves.
That's right.
It was a really interesting thought. Jason, thank you so much for being with us.
Love being with you, James. Thanks always.